So now that you've had a chance to watch the first two videos, really differentiating between what is common course design that's very instructor centered versus backward design model and something that's very student centered and very aligned, we're going to take a look at an alignment mapping tool, which is based on the backward design model. So in our webinar workshop objectives here, we're actually looking at objective 3. We're going to discuss how you can develop a fully aligned unit of study using the backward design process and using this alignment tool. The alignment map or alignment tool that we talk about is something that is very common in course design. And it really is based on this idea that everything in the course, everything in the module serves the purpose of the course objectives and the module objectives. And in the screenshot off to the side here in the image, you can see there's a little bit of breakdown. I'm going to actually bring up this tool in a moment. But some suggested operating procedure that I would throw out there would be really to progress through the alignment mapping tool in a linear order from stage 1 to stage 3. Jumping around certainly can be done, but sometimes that can be a little bit confusing. At the conclusion of each stage, make sure you cross-reference whatever it is you're working on with the course objectives and the module objectives to ensure alignment. That if, for example, the course objectives require students to discuss something and you're in the assessment stage, do you actually have an opportunity for them to discuss that piece? If that opportunity doesn't exist, either that opportunity now needs to be created to have a discussion or to have a role play or whatever it is that would allow students to discuss, or perhaps the course objective needs to be rewritten or the module level objective needs to be rewritten. And make those adjustments to ensure that alignment. Some tips when using this course alignment tool. Headers of each section in the tool have reminders off to the side, written in comments in Google Docs, so they can help guide you with your development. Once you copy the alignment tool to your own Google Drive, you can resolve those comments or leave them in the document. And list the specific course objectives and module objectives to which an assessment, activity, or interaction actually align. This will help ensure that alignment, that everything you're doing in the course has a purpose, a larger purpose, and a measurable and or observable purpose. So without further ado, let's take a look at the alignment mapping tool. And I'm going to make this just a little bit larger so we can all see it. So the first piece in this is introduction to the module or unit of study. I'm not going to put a length requirement on this, but what I'll say is this, that the introduction is typically something that's typed. It's typically something that is memorialized in that sense and really sets the stage for the students. It spurs curiosity. It's like any good story. You want to get the audience engaged and get the audience to want to learn more. You may preface it by defining something a little bit, but without giving everything away. So as you can see in our little hint, as I mentioned off to the side, statements that preview the module, including its purpose, they act as the stage setter. They do not have to be text. They certainly could be a video introduction to the module. We're in stage 1, by the way, where we're really looking about what needs to be learned in this module. The course level objectives. As I've mentioned in a previous section, these are the big ideas and specific understandings that students need to be able to walk away from the course with. They are most likely not all of the course objectives in the course. If there are 8 course objectives, there probably will only be 2 or 3 listed in this area. And I would recommend you pull these directly from your syllabus. Pull them directly from your syllabus so it's word for word exactly the same. And then, again, we're working linear through this. So we're moving down the page and we're just working like we would, left to right reading a book, right? The essential questions. This is probably my favorite part of the alignment mapping tool. These are the questions, the provocative questions that students should be able to answer by the end of the module, right? So these may be things like, listing how students should be able to explain something, or what is the definition of something, or even more provocative than that. I typically like to use both the course objectives and even the module objectives to write these questions. I typically like to have somewhere between 5 and 7 of these questions. And another sneaky thing I do when I design my units of study, I typically use these questions that I put here to drive either my discussion posts or homework assignments where I have short answer, fill in the blank type questions, or even essay questions that might be on a chapter test at the end of the module. So I really want my students to know these are questions you may see, and I may use all of them. If I have 5 of them, I may only use 3 of them. But I want my students to know these are questions you may see. You may not see them, but if you can answer them by the end of the module, all of them, you're in really good shape. The module objectives take those course level objectives and break them down even more granular. So again, if a course objective requires students to justify a particular position, these module objectives would probably ask students to identify the various positions, explain how different groups might have a perspective on something, and then eventually culminate in that justification exercise. The skills that will be used, practiced, or acquired during this module. These are things like, for example, research skills, analytical skills, calculation skills, depending obviously on your content. These are not necessarily regurgitations of the module level objectives, but instead, these are the real world applications. If I'm asking students to be able to take a justification, to take a position and really work with that and make an argument, then what's that skill? How's that translate to the real world? They may need to be able to develop persuasive recommendations to their boss. They may need to problem solve in the workplace. And that's really all I'm listing in this area are what are those skills that everything is sort of interrelated to here that students will get not only throughout this unit and align to my objectives, but they'll demonstrate on the various assessments as well as getting from the instructional materials that they'll absorb the information from, the activities and the technology that they'll use. Moving on to stage 2. Summative assessments. And again, I would work through this in order. Now that we have our course level objectives, how are students actually going to be measured on these course and perhaps these module level objectives? In most cases, I would say, and you have a hint here, this is probably going to be things like the final exam. So my recommendation would be to put midterm exam and then in parentheses, modules 1 through 4. Right? That's really what the midterm exam is going to be measuring, modules 1 through 4 and the very specific course objectives that students are working toward in modules 1, 2, 3, and 4. But even if there is a culminating chapter quiz, let's say, or module quiz, then that's also going to be listed here. And I want to make sure that every single question on that module quiz feeds back to these module level objectives. Formative assessments. Again, typically things like homework assignments, discussion posts, perhaps third-party tools like Padlet. It could be a Jamboard. It could be working through a SCORM package. It could be a vast number of things. But the biggest piece of these formative assessments are these are smaller opportunities, sometimes geared toward only 1 or 2 of your module level objectives. And students are going to receive feedback in some shape or form. If it's an automated self-graded quiz, they'll get that feedback. They'll be able to use the results of that quiz before they perform on the summative. If it's discussion posts, they're getting feedback either from peers or from the instructor, or maybe both, so they can get their misunderstandings clarified before now they actually have to take that information and apply it in an essay or in a term paper. If it's things like role plays, they're having an opportunity to interact with each other and get clarification from their peers, and if the instructor's involved in that, right there real time from the instructor. By the way, I want to point out any of these things could be done in a face-to-face class or for example, in a Zoom breakout room, in an asynchronous but yet online class, in a synchronous but yet online class or hybrid situation, or even in an asynchronous situation. That feedback could be on Google Docs, for example, and the students bouncing ideas off each other. Self-assessments. These allow students to really break down, what have I learned? It's metacognition, right? Thinking about their thinking, thinking about their learning. So having something that perhaps culminates the module, maybe right before the module quiz or even after the module quiz, what was the most difficult thing to learn in this module? Asking them those questions for them to submit or keep a journal. What were the most difficult things to learn? How can you see yourself applying this information in the future or in a future job? Those simple things alone help the students make connections to the real world, how the content that they've learned and what they've been asked to do in this first module or this first week isn't useless, isn't something that's just busy work. It's something that they're actually going to need later on. And they start to see value in it then. Well, I can see how I'm going to need this, so there is value. Do those opportunities exist? And by the way, these may be formal or informal. Formal meaning it's graded, informal meaning it's just an opportunity to reflect, and I'm not really going to grade it, but I'm going to read through it and maybe offer some feedback, maybe help clarify some real world expectations. After we've taken care to develop our summative, formative, and even self-assessments, align them to these module and course objectives. After you've written final exam, in parentheses put CO 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 3, 7, and 9, whichever course objectives they actually measure, that final exam actually measures. The discussion posts, which module level objectives. Your formatives are almost always going to relate to your module level objectives. Your summatives are almost always going to relate to your course level objectives. If there is a chapter or module level summative, something like a chapter quiz, then that's probably going to relate to the module level objectives. But I highly recommend in parentheses MO-1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever it is they actually measure. Now we can see that alignment. Same thing with our self-assessments. In stage 3, this stage can be a little bit complicated, and with full transparency, it can also be a little redundant. So why does all this exist? We're going to take a look at instructional materials, learning activities, interactions, and course technology. And where does that redundancy come into play? So for example, I'm actually going to continue to work through this linearly, but I will relate back to stage 2 to try to point out what was involved here. So quickly, instructional materials, these would be things like the PowerPoints, the PDFs, your instructor lectures, SCORM packages, anything where students are going to absorb material, watching a YouTube video, and so on. Be descriptive in this section. And I've given a little hint here. Here's a recommendation. Treat this section as a learning and evaluation plan, meaning list the ideal order in which a student should progress through the unit from the very first thing they should do through the last. So even though we've listed up here what those assessments would be, if the very first thing is for them to read a PowerPoint, we would read the Unit 1 PowerPoint about the American Revolution. We were going to be very specific there so we know exactly what students are going to be required to do and how that interaction takes place. We're also going to list Unit 1 PowerPoint American Revolution here with student to content. So we're putting it in both places. The difference is in the instructional materials section, we're listing it with action, read the Unit 1 PowerPoint on the American Revolution, where student content, we're really just listing Unit 1 American Revolution PowerPoint. But what we want to make sure is that there are opportunities for all of these interactions, student to student, student content, and student to instructor interactions. If first it's to read the PowerPoint, then it's to watch my lecture, I'm going to list number 2, watch the lecture on the American Revolution. That is a student to content interaction. That is not student to instructor. Student to instructor is more of the actual back and forth. It doesn't necessarily have to be live, but it's actually conversational, if you will. It's active. Student to instructor is active engagement. Student watching our lecture is almost tantamount to student reading a PowerPoint or a PDF. That is, listening to your lecture is passive. Yes, we want them to be actively listening, but it is passive cognitive activity. And reading is actually a little bit more active. Watching is, and listening, while yes, they're absorbing that information, is really that student to content interaction. So we've got our read the PowerPoint, watch the lecture, engage in the discussion post. I'm going to list these things in order, not only how they're absorbing the content, but how they're practicing the content. At the same time as I'm listing this out, I'm also pulling from those formative areas. That discussion post was probably in this formative section. It's student to student discussion post. So again, hopefully now we can see the redundancy that I've got some of these formatives coming into our instructional materials, also coming into our learning activities and interactions section. It's all interconnected. And I'm listing those MOs, right? Those module objectives that they relate to in parentheses, probably after each. What is the course technology that's going to support all of this? If I'm requiring students to take a quiz at the end, am I leveraging Blackboard and using the quizzing function on that? Or is it done in a different way? If I'm asking students to discuss, is technology being used to discuss? Are they going on to Flipgrid, or are they doing this in the discussion post on Blackboard? Are they doing it via Padlet? Are they doing it on LinkedIn? Maybe we're in a very professional course and I want them to set up a LinkedIn page, and they're going to share that website with everyone in the class, and they're going to engage in discussions there. What a great idea. But does that technology now support either the module and or course level objectives? All of it needs to be interrelated. So what does a real life example of this look like? This one still needs a little bit of work, but you should be able to get the gist. We have our introduction. This module will introduce students to the basics of grant writing and so on and so forth. And we're really starting to set the stage. Students will learn about the parts of grant writing, what a request for proposal is, and the generalized template used to create grant proposals. It may not sound like the most exciting thing to some students, but what this really is going to do is set the stage of this is what you're about to learn. We have listed here, taken directly from the syllabus, our course level objectives, COs 4, 5, 6, and 7. And these, as well as our module level objectives, are really what has helped drive the development of these essential questions. If by the end of this module, you can answer what is an RFP, how do nonprofit organizations find relevant RFPs, what are the essential components of a grant proposal, how do grant writers compose a problem statement, if you can do those, you are in really good shape, student. Our module level objectives each correspond to at least one course objective, maybe multiple in some cases. So we're going to define an RFP, explain how nonprofit organizations find relevant RFPs. By the way, notice how it relates to our essential questions. Identify certain things and explain. We're hitting lower and mid-level blooms with our module level objectives here, where on our course level objectives, we have mostly mid-level blooms. And drafting an outline, well, that is creation. That is higher level blooms, right? By the end of the course, we actually have a grant proposal put together. The skills, they're working on actually finding those grant resources, right? Locating those, analyzing and synthesizing information to develop an argument, formulating effective justifications, in this case, through the lens of grant proposals. Our summative assessments, we can see here there's going to be a final exam at the end of week 8, course objectives 1 through 4 and 6 and 8. There's going to be a final presentation. Course objective 7 is what this aligns to. Now, some of those aren't listed here, but that's okay because, well, 1 through 4, okay, we have course objective 4, and then 6 and 8, well, we definitely have 6. So pieces of this particular module are definitely being measured on the final exam, which is why we have it listed here. Same thing with the presentations. Pieces of this module are going to be found in that presentation at the end of the course. Our formative assessment, right? Our other evidence. We have a discussion post. There's our student-to-student interaction. We have a quiz that is mostly multiple choice and true false, and it's really relating to those module level objectives where students are going to be identifying things. So this is a little bit mislabeled here on accident. And our self-assessments. Our students will have those auto-graded quizzes and be able to make adjustments. They'll get feedback on those discussion posts, both from peers as well as faculty. And they're definitely going to get feedback on their problem statement from their draft of their grant paper, which again, when we look at this, the writing assignment is the problem statement. So students are working on all of these items. The instructional materials, the ideal order, right? They're going to read this PDF, watch these lectures, complete the quiz, engage in the discussion post, and complete their draft statement. This is the ideal order. Students may end up jumping around with the way that this is set up. And we see that redundancy here with discussion posts, the PDFs, virtual office hours is an opportunity for their instructor to student interaction, as well as comments, right? That is actually instructor-student interaction. Emails that may be exchanged, announcements that may be posted by faculty. Those are student and instructor interactions. All of this relates back to our module level and course level objectives. All of this is tied together. And here are our tools that are listed. It makes sense that Gmail might be leveraged for clarification, that Word, PDF, and PowerPoint are being used not only to obtain information, but also to submit this grant proposal draft. That Google will be used, right, to locate essential information that they would need in a grant proposal. And of course, the RIC, sure, it's a tool, especially in the online format, but it doesn't have to be in the online format, it could be in the face-to-face format. Using this alignment tool, we can plan out an entire module, and we do this for every module in a course. We planned out an entire course. It can be a little bit frustrating at first. I understand that, especially if you're new to this. But once you get the hang of how to use this alignment mapping tool, not only would every aspect of a module be completely aligned to the objectives of the module as well as the course objectives, everything serves a purpose and the larger purpose of the course. We don't have things that are just busy work, and we definitely don't have items that aren't being measured. Everything is interconnected, and this tool helps us do that. So to wrap some things up a little bit, just to very quickly recap, backwards design, we build with the end in mind from a learner-centered perspective, plan for both formative and summative assessments. We design authentic and engaging learning activities and interactions, all of this feeding back to those course objectives and module objectives, and we have the alignment that we're looking for. Everything serves a larger purpose. If you need help working through your first module level objective, or forgive me, through your first alignment map, please reach out to us at id@daemen.edu. We are here to work with you. That email goes to all of us in the office, and you're welcome to schedule a time. We can sit down and work through an alignment map with you until you get the hang of it, until you're comfortable with it, and then you can use that course design process to develop the rest of your course. The beauty about this being something like a document, it's not only that it's editable, but we can make our changes, we can fix the gaps in our own learning plan that we're going to implement. And what we also can do is we can use this to take notes about things that did and didn't work. And you as an instructor could certainly share this with adjuncts that might take over a course. This essentially is the lesson plan for the unit, so they can implement your vision. I hope you enjoyed this series. I hope you found it extremely helpful.